His name was Elijah Carter, and once upon a time, long before the lines and sorrow carved themselves into the corners of his eyes, he was a man defined by quiet pride and honest work. Elijah was born into a generation that believed in handshakes, long hours, and the dignity of labor. He worked 36 years as a maintenance technician at the city's main water treatment facility, never late, rarely sick, and always thorough. People like Elijah weren't the ones featured on magazine covers or standing behind podiums, but the city ran because men like him showed up. Day in, day out, in the rain, in the cold. Through holidays when others were home with family, Elijah was in the tunnels below the city, ensuring clean water flowed without interruption. He never asked for recognition. In fact, he never expected it. He just wanted a simple life, enough food for his table, a modest roof overhead, and a little something to leave behind for his wife, Alma. Alma. Alma had been his heart since the war. They met when she was a clerk in the post office, and he was a lanky, quiet man, sending letters home to his mother. She smiled first. He responded with a stammer, but he returned every week, just to see that smile again. They married in a small chapel with nothing but a borrowed suit and a second-hand dress, but their love was pure gold. Over the decades they never had children of their own, but they poured their hearts into their nieces, nephews, and neighborhood children, tutoring, feeding, comforting. In retirement, Elijah looked forward to two things: sitting with Alma on their porch swing every evening, and finally having enough time to fix the small things he never got to: his late father's clock, the wobbly fence gate, Alma's favorite rocking chair. But life had its own plans. Not long after his 69th birthday, Alma fell ill. At first it was fatigue, then confusion, then the trembling hands. The doctors called it early-onset Parkinson's with secondary complications. The medications weren't cheap, the hospital visits even worse. But Elijah, ever the loyal husband, refused to place her in assisted care. He learned how to lift her gently, how to administer her pills, how to sleep lightly in case she needed him in the middle of the night. Month by month, their savings thinned. The pension he'd worked a lifetime to earn had been delayed due to some processing backlog. Elijah trusted the system. He believed that if he just followed the rules, waited patiently, and asked politely, things would work out. He didn't own a smartphone. He didn't know how to file complaints online. He only knew how to show up in person, wait his turn, and speak when spoken to. So when he dressed up that Monday morning, he wore his cleanest button-down, polished his old leather shoes, and carried his paperwork in a plastic file with Alma's handwritten label, Elijah, Pension Documents. Alma had whispered to him that morning, her voice weak but hopeful. Maybe today will be the day, Eli. Maybe we can finally refill the prescription. He kissed her forehead, promised he'd be back by lunch, and headed to the bank with the same steady walk he used for 3 decades. Strong, slow, sure. He had no idea that his faith in the system was about to be tested in a way that would break even the strongest of spirits. It was a Tuesday morning. Clear skies, mild breeze, the kind of day that almost tricked you into thinking life was as peaceful as it appeared from the outside. Elijah Carter, wearing a wool cap over his thinning grey hair, stepped carefully onto the cracked sidewalk that led from his modest home to the main road. His movements were slower now, not from laziness or fragility, but from decades of physical labor that had turned once nimble joints into creaking hinges. In one hand, he carried his pension documents sealed carefully in a faded plastic folder. In the other, a brown paper bag with a homemade sandwich, Alma's favorite, buttered rye with cucumber and tomato, prepared by her trembling hands that morning. For after the bank, she had whispered. The downtown bank branch sat proudly in a pristine glass building at the corner of Alder and Fifth. Its modern design gleamed against the city's aging brick surroundings. To Elijah, it felt more like a government building than a place of service, cold, metallic, and indifferent. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of fresh coffee and expensive perfume. Marble floors stretched across the vast lobby. A row of high counters stood beneath glowing signage. Teller 1, Teller 2, Customer Care, and so on. Customers milled about in orderly lines, guarded by the invisible boundaries of velvet ropes. Elijah took his place near the back of the queue, adjusting his folder and standing with quiet dignity. His knees ached slightly. The lobby's single long bench was occupied by younger customers scrolling on phones, oblivious to his presence. He said nothing. 3 places ahead of him stood a mother trying to quiet her toddler. Behind him, a man in a suit mumbled about stock delays into a Bluetooth earpiece. Elijah simply waited, silently, patiently. Then the doors opened. He noticed the change in energy before the man even entered. A confident stride, polished Oxfords, tailored jacket, aviator sunglasses still on, despite the indoor lighting. He moved with the ease of someone used to cutting lines, used to the world making space for him. Heads turned. The woman behind the teller counter, a young lady named Miss Dana, noticed him instantly. She straightened her posture and flashed a rehearsed, charming smile. The man didn't even look at the queue. He walked past everyone, past the tired mother, past the old veteran in the corner, past Elijah, right up to Dana's desk. There, with an air of practiced discretion, he slid something under her keyboard. It was a crisp stack of $100 bills, $1,000 at least. She didn't blink, didn't hesitate. "Sir, welcome. How may I help you today?" she said. Her tone dipped in sugar. Elijah blinked. Surely she would ask him to step back and take his turn, but she didn't. Without a word, she abandoned the customer she was currently helping, a young couple with a loan inquiry, and focused entirely on the rich man. She processed his request swiftly, typing with intensity. Her demeanor completely changed from moments before. The couple, confused, stepped back. A few murmurs rippled through the room, but most people didn't want trouble, except Elijah. He had been waiting for nearly an hour. His feet hurt. Alma was at home waiting, and the prescription refill deadline was nearing. He cleared his throat, stepped gently toward the counter, and said in his warm, respectful voice, "Ma'am, I believe it's my turn now." Dana didn't even look at him. She kept typing, still smiling at the wealthy man. Elijah tried again. "I've been waiting since 8:40 this morning. Just need to submit some documents." This time, she responded, but without turning her head. "Sir, please take a seat. I'll be with you shortly." It was a phrase meant to end the conversation. But Elijah wasn't angry. He was simply confused, hurt. This wasn't how things used to be. This wasn't the world he worked so hard to build, where waiting your turn meant something, where money didn't silence fairness, and where service came from duty, not bribery. He stepped back in silence, clutching the folder a little tighter. His knuckles turned white. He said nothing more. Hours passed. 3 tellers rotated in and out of their desks. A manager came by and smiled, but didn't ask if he needed help. The man who bribed the teller left in style, phone in hand, ego untouched. And Elijah waited, because that's what good people do when they still believe the system works. But his belief was about to be tested again. The next morning, Elijah rose just after dawn, long before the sun reached over the rooftops. The clock on the wall ticked quietly above the sink while he stirred 2 cups of tea, one with honey and ginger for Alma's cough, and one plain for himself. He folded yesterday's newspaper and slid it neatly beneath the fruit bowl where Alma always left her hairbrush. Her eyes followed him slowly across the room, lined with both love and concern. "You don't have to go again today, Eli," she whispered from the old armchair near the window, where a heavy blanket covered her legs. "You've done more than enough." Elijah smiled faintly and walked over, kneeling beside her with a gentleness not often seen in men who had once lifted steel beams for a living. "If I don't go, we won't have enough for your prescriptions next week. This one is important, Alma. Just one more visit." She nodded, though her eyes filled with worry. She knew, perhaps better than he did, that the world had grown colder. Still, she didn't stop him. He left the house with the same folder tucked under his arm, shoes freshly brushed, collar neatly folded. Dignity, he believed, was something you wore, no matter how others treated you. When he reached the bank again, the same familiar sounds greeted him: the muffled music overhead, the low murmur of transactions, and the soft clicks of polished shoes on the floor. He stood in line once more, the folder in hand, and waited quietly. The same teller was there, Dinah. This time she glanced at him briefly, her eyes barely acknowledging him. Her mascara was heavier today. Her phone, partially hidden behind the monitor, lit up with messages every few minutes. She giggled quietly between customers. When it was finally his turn, nearly an hour after opening, he stepped forward with a hopeful smile. "Good morning, Ma'am. I came yesterday too. I've brought all the documents again for the pension application. Everything should be in order." Dana didn't ask for the folder. She barely glanced at it. Her fingers tapped carelessly on the keyboard. She sighed. "Sir, it takes time to process these things. It's not instant. You can come back. Tomorrow, maybe." "But, Ma'am," Elijah started gently, "I was told yesterday that—" "That's the process," she snapped, this time meeting his eyes with something close to annoyance. "We're overwhelmed. It's just not ready." He blinked but said nothing more. He stepped back quietly, folder still unopened in his hands. It was the same set of papers he had carefully updated the night before: tax records, hospital letters, identification, all complete, all ignored. That was Tuesday. Wednesday came. Same folder, same clothes, though this time his collar was slightly wrinkled. Alma insisted on walking him to the door despite her weakening legs. "You're doing this for us," she said, her frail fingers brushing the edge of his coat. "Don't let them break your spirit, Eli." He waited again in the same line. Some of the faces were new, some the same. Dana looked up, saw him, and immediately averted her eyes. When he reached the counter, she spoke before he could. "It's not ready. Come back later." "But you haven't even checked my—" I said, "Come back later." She waved to the next customer. Elijah stood still for a moment, then slowly turned and walked out. Outside the glass doors, he sat on the bench and opened the paper bag with his sandwich. He didn't eat it. He just sat there in silence, the wind tugging softly at his coat sleeve. Thursday. This time the pain in his legs was sharper. He walked slower. Inside the bank, the security guard nodded politely, but made no effort to assist. He joined the queue once again. And once again, when he reached Dana's counter, she didn't even let him speak. "Sir, you can't just keep showing up every day expecting miracles. It's policy. Come back next week." He wanted to argue, but his voice failed him. And he remembered something Alma had said the night before. "This world rewards noise, Eli. But you've always stood quietly. You don't demand, you endure." So he turned away. Again. Friday. The breaking point. It was raining, lightly at first, then harder. Elijah had forgotten his umbrella, but it didn't matter. The bank would open in 10 minutes. He would wait. He was always early. By now, even the security guard recognized him. "You're back again, sir?" the guard said gently. "Yes," Elijah said, his voice low. "Just hoping today they might finish the process." He stood outside until the doors opened, his shoulders wet, folder covered by his coat. Inside, Dana was already at her post. Her hair had been freshly styled, her nails long and red like polished glass. She didn't look up. When Elijah approached, she finally did. She leaned forward, lowered her voice, and said something he never expected. "Sir, let me explain something to you. Processing a pension takes 2 months, minimum. But if you're in a hurry, I can help. For a small fee." He frowned. "Fee?" She smiled tightly. 20% of your payout. I can finish it today, and you walk out with cash. Or you can go through the official process, which takes months. Your choice." His lips parted, but no words came. Dana leaned back in her chair, flipping her pen between her fingers. "If not, go ahead and report me. I'll deny it, and no one will care. But I'm trying to help you here." The word help felt poisonous on her tongue. Elijah looked down at his folder. Alma's hospital papers were still inside. The bill for her medication was due Monday. He hesitated. Then, with trembling hands, he nodded and signed. What happened next stunned him. When he received the cash payout, he realized something was wrong. The numbers didn't add up. "You said 20%, he whispered. Dana raised a brow. "That's what I said. I took 30. Call it interest." Elijah stepped away from the counter, clutching the cash in his fist. He walked to the corner of the lobby and sat quietly on a cold metal chair. And there, for the first time in many years, Elijah Carter wept. He didn't sob, he didn't wail, just silent tears streaming down a face that had seen too many storms. Elijah Carter sat motionless in the furthest corner of the bank lobby. To the people bustling in and out, he might have appeared simply tired, like any other elder resting from the fatigue of the day. But beneath that stillness was a quiet collapse. He sat hunched forward, shoulders caved slightly, as though a great weight had settled across his back and pressed into his chest. His fingers trembled around the edge of the brown envelope, now empty except for a small receipt and a copy of the signed document. His eyes, which had once helped weld steel, now stared at nothing in particular, just the marble floor tiles. Each blink was slow, as if his spirit was shutting its eyes. In one hand he clutched what was left of the payout, bills hastily folded, still smelling faintly of fresh ink. But it wasn't the money that filled his heart with grief. It was the betrayal, the theft of dignity, the quiet violation of a man who had done nothing but try to do things the right way. It wasn't just that Dana had taken 30% of his pension, the part that could have bought Alma's medication, paid for her hospital cab rides, or even brought in a nurse for 2 days. It was that she had stolen his belief in decency. She had turned his humility into a transaction, his patience into a joke, his trust into a weakness. And still, he didn't complain. He didn't shout. He didn't call for justice. He just sat there. Every now and then, his lips moved in silent prayer. Not the kind people say out loud in churches, but the kind that comes from a place beyond language. A whisper from soul to sky. People passed him, bank customers, staff, even a mother with a crying toddler. No one noticed. Except one person, the branch manager. Her name was Clara Montgomery, and unlike Dana, she wasn't born into the privilege of expensive suits or office chairs with lumbar support. She had worked her way up from the bottom, starting years ago as a part-time teller while attending night school to care for her mother. She knew what it meant to stand in long lines. She knew what exhaustion looked like. She was on her way back from a boardroom meeting, a portfolio of printed reports in one arm and her phone in the other, when she spotted him, the old man. Something about his posture halted her completely. She stared for a moment. He didn't look like he had come to the bank for long-term business. He wasn't dressed in designer clothes, no phone in hand, no complaints to the staff. Just a quiet stillness that demanded attention, not with volume, but with gravity. She approached gently, crouching beside him. "Sir," she said, keeping her voice low, "are you all right?" Elijah turned slowly. He blinked. "Ma'am," he whispered, uncertain who she was. "I'm the branch manager," Clara said, placing the folder of reports down on the chair beside her. "You've been sitting here for a while." Elijah hesitated. Then, with a quiet sigh, he placed the now thinner envelope in her hand. He didn't explain everything all at once. He didn't even say the teller's name. He simply began to speak, in the same steady tone that had helped raise 2 sons, repair his roof during storms, and read Bible verses to Alma during her worst nights. He told Clara how he had come 5 days in a row, how he'd waited respectfully, how each time he was dismissed, how, eventually, he was coerced, manipulated, humiliated, how the woman behind the counter made him feel like his honesty was an inconvenience. And then he paused. He looked away, ashamed of his own tears. Clara didn't ask for more. She had heard enough. She rose from her crouch like someone coming out of a vow, and something about her eyes had changed. There was no hesitation in her movement, no confusion, no "I'll look into it," no bureaucracy, just action. She turned sharply and walked across the lobby to Dana, who was now laughing softly at something on her phone. Clara stood in front of her desk. "Dana," she said evenly, "close your register. Now." Dana blinked. "Excuse me?" I said, "Close it. Now. Then bring your transaction log and join me in my office." "What's this about?" Clara didn't answer, but her tone was clear. Justice had entered the room. The door to Clara Montgomery's office closed with a soft but unmistakable click. Inside, Dana shifted uncomfortably in the chair across from Clara's desk. Gone was the confident smirk. Gone was the polished customer service smile. In its place was a forced stillness, shoulders tense, eyes scanning for a clue as to what this was about. Clara said nothing at first. She simply opened her desk drawer and pulled out a slim black folder labeled Teleperformance and Ethics Reports. She laid it flat on the table between them. Then she looked up. "I want you to tell me exactly what you did with Mr. Elijah Carter's pension transaction," Clara said, her voice as calm and lethal as a sharpened blade. Dana's eyes flicked downward. "I processed it, like any other client. Did you take anything from him?" "No." Clara leaned in slightly. "Did you charge him a processing fee?" Dana hesitated. "Processing fees aren't allowed on pension accounts," Clara said flatly. "So I'll ask again, and you'll want to think carefully. Did you take a cut of Mr. Carter's pension funds?" Dana's voice was quieter now. "He offered a tip for speeding it up." "That's a lie." Clara opened the folder and pulled out a slip of paper, the surveillance timestamp log from that morning. Then another, a signed complaint form Elijah had filled out at her request just minutes ago, with trembling hands but a steady heart. Then came the last page. Dana's own ledger entries, showing that the transaction had been pushed through with a manual override code only available to senior staff, a code Dana had no right to use. "Dana," Clara said, now folding her hands in front of her, "you've not only taken unauthorized compensation, you've committed what we legally consider internal financial misconduct and possibly criminal extortion. You manipulated a vulnerable elderly customer, withheld his funds for days, and took more than you even threatened to." Dana was quiet now. Her eyes darted toward the door, then back to Clara. She shifted her weight like someone trying to stay balanced while drowning in place. Clara reached for the intercom button and pressed it. "Security, please come to my office." "Wait," Dana said, her voice rising. "Please, Clara, let me explain. He looked like he couldn't afford anything. I didn't think anyone would notice. I didn't take that much." Clara narrowed her eyes. "You didn't think anyone would notice? Because he was old? Because he was poor? Because he was quiet? Dana opened her mouth again, but words failed her. You used his silence as your cover, Clara said, her voice trembling now, not with fear, but with anger that had been earned. You mistook patience for permission, and that's something I'll never tolerate in this bank. A knock on the door. 2 security officers stepped in, tall, uniformed, their faces unreadable. Clara stood. Dana Owens, you are suspended with immediate effect pending formal review. But let me make this absolutely clear. I am forwarding this case to Corporate Fraud Investigations and will personally file a formal report with the State Banking Commission. Dana's face turned pale. Please, I need this job. Elijah needed his pension, Clara snapped, not with cruelty, but with cold truth. And he needed it to care for his sick wife, not to line your purse. The guards escorted Dana out. The entire bank went quiet as she passed through the main hall. Some staff looked away, others stared. She no longer looked like the woman who glided behind the counters. She looked small now, not because she'd been fired, but because her mask had been stripped away in full daylight. Back in the office, Clara turned to her assistant manager and said, "Get accounting on the line. I want that man's full pension recalculated and every cent of what was taken restored. Today, no more waiting." "Yes, ma'am." An hour later, Elijah was called back inside. Clara met him in the waiting area herself. She wasn't wearing her blazer anymore. She had rolled up her sleeves, the way people do when they're not trying to look important, but rather be useful. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "please come with me." He rose slowly, unsure of what was happening. When he entered the small side office, there on the table sat a white envelope. This time sealed, stamped, and respectfully labelled, "Full pension disbursement. Restituted." Clara handed it to him with both hands, as if it were something sacred. "Everything that was taken from you, plus a small reimbursement for your time and distress, has been returned." Elijah opened the envelope carefully. His eyes widened. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Clara said. "I'm the one who owes you an apology for allowing someone like that to work under my roof." Elijah looked down at the envelope again, his lips quivering. Then he looked back up and said something that stayed with Clara long after the day ended. "It's not just the money. It's thank you for seeing me." And with that, he turned and walked out, standing straighter than he had in days. The next morning, the branch didn't open with its usual polished rhythm. The usual sounds, the clicking of keyboards, the hum of printers, the casual chatter between tellers were subdued. Something had shifted. Everyone had heard. Word of Dana Owens' immediate dismissal had travelled faster than policy memos ever could. Whispers swirled by the water cooler and in the break room, but it wasn't just gossip. It was reflection. One of their own, a polished, well-dressed, fast-talking teller, had not just crossed the line but dug beneath it, taking advantage of a man everyone else had seen and silently ignored. And now a mirror was being held up to them all. A quiet culture of disregard. Clara Montgomery stood by the glass partition in her office, looking out not just at customers, but at her staff. For months, perhaps years, a quiet culture had grown like mildew beneath the marble floors, one where status dictated service, where those who complained loudest got things done fastest, and those who waited quietly. Especially the elderly were tolerated, not honored, and she had allowed it. Not actively, but by assuming professionalism meant fairness, without verifying fairness. That morning, Clara called a mandatory staff meeting. Phones were put on hold. The doors stayed locked for 15 minutes longer than usual. The blinds were drawn. No memos, no slide decks. Just Clara, standing at the front of the break room with a single photograph in her hand. It was a candid shot of Mr. Elijah Carter, taken from the surveillance footage, not the moment he signed the fraudulent form, but a still frame from when he had sat in the far corner of the bank, crying silently and counting his remaining bills. She held it up without a word. Then she said, "This is a real man. He lives 3 bus stops from here. He fought in a war. He built roofs for schools. He raised 2 daughters. His wife is sick. And we failed him." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Important. "I failed him," she added, but not alone. Eyes dropped. A few chins lifted, ready to argue. But no one spoke. Let this be the last time any one of us makes decisions based on someone's shoes, clothes, accent, or how fast they speak. From now on, we serve people, not profiles. She walked to the whiteboard and wrote a single phrase, "See the unseen." Underneath it, she listed new policies. Elderly customers would now have priority hours each week. Every staff member would complete a new empathy training program, led by Clara herself. An anonymous customer feedback system would be installed not just online, but physically in the lobby. And finally, each month, the team would read one real-life case about elder abuse or financial neglect and discuss it. There was no applause, no team-building atmosphere, just a somber commitment in every pair of eyes, because healing doesn't start with pride. It starts with humility. Mr. Carter, for his part, wasn't expecting anything to change. Not really. People like him had long learned that society made room for the powerful and stepped over the weary. So when his phone rang that evening and a representative from the bank offered to personally escort him the next morning for his resubmitted pension, at no cost, no cuts, and with a letter of apology, he thought it was a prank. But they came. And when he arrived at the bank again, he didn't sit in the corner. He was ushered to a private consultation room, given water, given time, given dignity. He left that day with more than money. He left seen. Later that week, Clara quietly reached out to a local non-profit that helped elderly citizens navigate financial systems. She didn't tell anyone at the bank, but she started a partnership. A real one. Staff would now volunteer monthly to assist elderly clients with paperwork on their own time. No compensation, just character. A week passed, then 2, and something strange began to happen in the bank. Customers noticed. A mother came in with her elderly father and said, "I don't know what happened here, but everyone's so kind now." A teenager helping her grandmother whispered, "They didn't rush us this time." That lady at the desk even smiled. Even the janitor, quiet old Miguel, who had mopped the same floor for 12 years, was greeted by name by a teller who had never spoken to him before. Small things, but meaningful. And then, on the final Friday of the month, as staff were closing up, Clara found a sealed envelope on her desk. No return address. Inside was a note. "You reminded us that doing the right thing doesn't start with policies, it starts with people. Thank you for seeing me when others didn't. E.C." She folded the note slowly, set it in the corner of her desk. And she wept. Not from guilt this time, but from the deep ache of knowing that even one act of compassion, when followed by integrity, could ripple across a community like light, breaking through fog. There are moments in life that quietly divide us, not by race, wealth, or belief, but by response. Moments where injustice unfolds in silence, and someone chooses to either walk away, stay still, or step forward. This story, though rooted in a simple bank lobby, was not about a bank. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about corruption. It was about character. Character is not how loudly we speak of principles. It is how gently we treat those who seem to have none left to offer us. The teller, Dana Owens, had a polished resume. She dressed well, smiled quickly, knew all the right jargon. On paper she was professional, but professionalism without morality is just performance. She had all the tools, but none of the truth. She was educated in finance, but not in ethics, fluent in policy, but silent in conscience. And Mr. Elijah Carter, a man dismissed because of worn shoes and trembling hands. Yet it was his presence, his pain, his honesty, his quiet sorrow that became the moral mirror for everyone around him. He did not raise his voice. He did not insult her. He simply stood there, day after day, believing that if he could just wait long enough, maybe someone would do the right thing. And someone did. It took 5 days. It took courage. It took a manager stepping beyond rules and into responsibility. But once it happened, once injustice was named, healing began. There will always be systems, banks, governments, institutions, and sometimes those systems will fail, not because they're broken, but because they're staffed by people who've forgotten why they exist. But when systems fail, humanity must not. If you work in a hospital, a bank, a school, a government office, remember this. You are not there to serve transactions. You are there to serve people. You are not just a role. You are a gatekeeper of dignity. When you overlook the elderly, the soft-spoken, the tired mother or disabled veteran, you're not just making them wait longer. You're communicating, however unintentionally, that their worth is negotiable, that kindness is conditional, that dignity has a price. But character is what you do when no one is watching and, more importantly, when someone is waiting. It's tempting to assume that injustice always wears a villain's face. But more often it wears a smile, a suit, a smooth voice behind a polished counter. Sometimes injustice is not done by monsters, but by ordinary people who've forgotten to care. Dana didn't steal from Elijah out of desperation. She did it out of entitlement. She believed the old man's silence meant weakness. She believed no one would care enough to notice. But the truth is, character is noticed, so is corruption. Maybe not instantly, but always, eventually. The rich man who passed the $1,000 bill under the counter. He never looked back. The poor man who sat quietly and cried. He changed a company. Power may purchase convenience, but principle builds legacy. Elijah Carter's story is not rare. It is happening across the world, in forgotten pension lines, overcrowded clinics, underfunded schools, and silent courtrooms. People are not asking for favors. They're asking to be seen, to be treated fairly. The greatest tragedy is not that injustice occurs, but that it often happens in full view of people who could have stopped it. And so the call is simple. Don't be the one who looks away. Don't be the one who waits for a camera or a crowd to act right. Don't be the person who chooses status over service. Be the one who defends the quiet man in the corner. Be the one who whispers, "This isn't right," even when no one else speaks. Be the one who remembers that your uniform, your title, your office, none of it matters more than your humanity. Because in the end, you will not be remembered for the lines you cut, the money you made, or the status you held. You will be remembered for how you made people feel, especially those who had nothing to offer you in return. So, dear viewers, here's a question for you. Have you ever witnessed a moment like this in your community where someone was mistreated, overlooked, or abused simply because they lacked power? Have you ever been Elijah, quiet, patient, hoping someone would care? Or have you ever looked the other way when you should have said something? We ask these not to judge, but to reflect, because change doesn't start in government halls. It starts in our daily choices. So we ask, drop a heart if you believe the world needs more character, not just credentials. Share this story with someone who works in a system and remind them, people come before policy. And before you go, let us know in the comments, which country are you watching from today? And if you believe in content that restores the soul and calls us higher, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us share more stories that remind the world character still matters. Thank you for watching.